My name is Amanda. I am 28 years old, and last Thanksgiving changed my life forever. What should have been a simple family dinner turned into a nightmare when my dad convinced my grandmother to spend $18,000 on a family vacation to Hawaii. But at the airport gate, he coldly told her, "There's no ticket for you. Just go home." I'll never forget the look on her face. 3 weeks later, my family returned from their trip and froze when they saw me standing beside a man. They never expected what happened next. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button if you've ever witnessed someone being betrayed by their own family, and subscribe to hear more stories about standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. To understand what happened, you need to know about my family. My father, Jake, is 52 years old and works as an insurance salesman. He's always been the type to flaunt a lifestyle he can't actually afford. Designer clothes, luxury cars, country club memberships, all while his bank account tells a different story. My mother, Stephanie, 48, works as an accountant at a small firm. She's lived in my father's shadow for as long as I can remember, always agreeing with him regardless of how outrageous his ideas or demands are. My older brother, Brian, 30, is practically a carbon copy of my dad. He's adopted the same expensive tastes without the work ethic to support them. He's bounced between sales jobs, never staying at one place longer than 6 months, and frequently asks Grandma for money that everyone knows he'll never repay. My younger sister, Heather, is 24 and still in college. Well, technically in college, she's changed her major 4 times and seems more interested in partying than studying. As the baby of the family, she's been spoiled rotten and expects the world to accommodate her every whim. Then there's my grandmother, Martha. At 76, she became wealthy after my grandfather passed away 5 years ago, leaving her with a successful small manufacturing business they had built together. The business was sold shortly after his death, leaving Grandma with a substantial nest egg that my father has been eyeing ever since. He somehow convinced her to let him manage her finances, though he's been far from transparent about what he's doing with her money. My relationship with Grandma has always been special. While the rest of my family saw her as a checkbook, I genuinely enjoyed spending time with her. As a child, I would sit for hours, listening to her stories about Grandpa and their adventures building their business from scratch. She funded my college education, I studied finance, and I'm the only one who regularly checks on her health and happiness. The history of my family taking advantage of Grandma is long and ugly. My father has convinced her to invest in several failed business ventures, including a restaurant that closed after just 3 months and a can't-miss real estate opportunity that somehow missed spectacularly. Brian once borrowed $20,000 to buy a luxury car that he sold 6 months later, with the money mysteriously disappearing. Expensive gifts from Grandma, jewelry, electronics, artwork, often ended up sold online within weeks. Despite all this, Grandma maintained a generous spirit and an almost blind trust in her family, especially her son. I tried several times to gently warn her about being too generous, but she would always say, "Family is all that matters in the end, Amanda. Money is just paper." I respected her perspective but worried constantly about how my family was exploiting her kindness. As I grew older and started my career in financial planning, I became even more concerned about how my father was handling Grandma's money. Whenever I asked specific questions about her investments or spending, I was shut down immediately. "Mind your own business," my father would snap. "I'm taking care of everything." But the new cars, expensive vacations, and renovation projects at my parents' house told a different story about where at least some of Grandma's money was going. I kept my concerns to myself, mostly not wanting to upset Grandma or create more family tension. In retrospect, I wish I had been braver sooner. Maybe then what happened at Thanksgiving could have been avoided altogether. Last Thanksgiving, we gathered at Grandma's house, as we always did. Her home is a beautiful, spacious colonial that she and Grandpa bought 40 years ago. The interior is filled with antique furniture and family heirlooms, each with its own story that Grandma loves to tell. She had been cooking since early morning, with only my help while everyone else showed up fashionably late, with cheap bottles of wine and half-hearted compliments about how good everything smelled. "You shouldn't have gone to all this trouble, Mom," my father said, as he surveyed the spread of turkey stuffing, mashed potatoes, 3 different vegetables, and homemade pies. The table was set with Grandma's best china and crystal glasses that had been wedding gifts. It was obvious she had spent days preparing for this meal. "It's no trouble at all," Grandma replied with a genuine smile. "Having my family together is what matters most." The dinner conversation revolved around my parents' new kitchen renovation, Heather's latest boyfriend, and Brian's vague plans to start a business. No one asked Grandma about her life or recent activities. I tried to bring up her volunteer work at the local library, but my father quickly interrupted with a story about a wealthy client he had recently signed. After dinner, as we moved to the living room for coffee and dessert, my father cleared his throat dramatically. "I have an amazing idea for this family," he announced, standing in the center of the room, like he was about to deliver a keynote address. "We need some quality time together, away from the daily grind. I've been researching, and I found the perfect winter getaway in Hawaii." He pulled out his phone and started showing glossy photos of a luxury resort on Maui. "3 weeks of paradise," he said enthusiastically. "Private beaches, spa treatments, snorkeling, golf 5-star restaurants, the works." "Sounds expensive," I commented immediately, suspicious of where this was heading. "Well, quality isn't cheap," my father replied, with a dismissive wave. "But it's worth every penny for what this family needs. A chance to reconnect, recharge, and create memories that will last a lifetime. Especially for you, Mom," he added, turning to Grandma with a sudden show of concern. "You've been alone in this big house too long. This trip could be exactly what you need." My mother jumped in. "It would be so good for your health, Martha. The warm weather, the fresh air. Think of how much better you'll feel after getting away from this cold winter." Brian nodded enthusiastically. "Plus, the activities are amazing. We could all go on a helicopter tour of the islands. I've always wanted to do that." "And the Instagram photos will be incredible," Heather added, already imagining the likes she would get. I watched as my grandmother's expression shifted from surprise to consideration. "It does sound lovely," she admitted, "but I'm not sure I'm up for such a long trip at my age." "Nonsense," my father insisted. "We'll all be there to help you. This could be the last chance for us all to take a trip like this together. Don't you want to create those memories with your grandchildren?" I saw the manipulation for what it was, the implied before it's too late hanging in the air, unspoken but clearly understood. Grandma's eyes grew misty at the thought. "How much would all this cost?" she asked quietly. My father had clearly been waiting for this question. "I've worked out all the numbers. For 6 people, 3 weeks, at the resort flights, activities, and meals, we're looking at $18,000 total. A bargain for what we're getting, honestly." I nearly choked on my coffee. $18,000 was an enormous sum, and I knew exactly who would be footing the bill. "That's quite a lot," Grandma said hesitantly. "Think of it as an investment in family," my father pressed. "Experiences are worth more than money, right? That's what you always say." I tried to interject. "Maybe we should look at some more affordable options, or a shorter trip." My father shot me a warning glare. "Amanda, don't be a killjoy. This is about quality time as a family. You can't put a price tag on that." As the evening progressed, I watched with growing unease as my father, mother, brother, and sister all took turns persuading Grandma. They spoke of healing family bonds, creating lasting memories, and how this trip would be the experience of a lifetime. I noticed the meaningful glances exchanged between my parents and siblings whenever Grandma wasn't looking, and a sinking feeling grew in my stomach. When I tried to get Grandma alone to discuss the trip, someone always interrupted or redirected the conversation. When I asked about specific details of the booking arrangements, my father was frustratingly vague. Later that night, as I was helping clean up in the kitchen, I overheard my father and brother talking in the hallway. "The old lady won't ever set foot on that plane," my father chuckled quietly. "Let her think she's coming for now." "What about Amanda?" Brian asked. "She's suspicious." "She always is," my father replied dismissively. "She'll fall in line. She always does." I stood frozen, dish towel in hand, as they continued discussing how they would use the money for additional excursions not on the official itinerary. My hands shook with anger and shock. They were planning to take Grandma's money and leave her behind all along. Over the next few days, I tried repeatedly to warn Grandma. I suggested she should ask to see the tickets and detailed itinerary before transferring any money. I hinted that perhaps she should reconsider such a large expense, but she was swept up in the excitement of the trip, buying new clothes and luggage, telling her friends about the family vacation she was taking. She trusted her son completely. "Your father is handling everything," she told me with a smile. "He's always been so good with details." A week after Thanksgiving, she transferred $18,000 to my father's account. When I found out, I felt physically ill. I knew what was coming, but I had no idea how cruel it would actually be. The weeks leading up to the departure were filled with elaborate preparations. Grandma bought new summer clothes, a wide-brimmed hat for the beach sunscreen, and a brand new set of luggage. She visited her doctor to make sure she was fit to travel and got all the recommended vaccinations. She called her friends with excitement in her voice, telling them about the 3-week family vacation she was about to experience. I hadn't seen her this animated in years, not since before Grandpa died. I helped her pack, trying to maintain a positive attitude despite knowing what my family was planning. Every time she expressed excitement about a particular activity or mentioned how wonderful it would be to spend time with everyone, I felt a knife twist in my gut. I contemplated telling her the truth several times, but I couldn't bring myself to destroy her happiness prematurely. Part of me still hoped I was wrong, or that my family would have a last-minute change of heart. The morning of our departure arrived bright and clear. My father came to pick up Grandma and me at 8 o'clock. He seemed unusually cheerful, complimenting Grandma on her new travel outfit and insisting on carrying her luggage to the car. When we arrived at the airport, the rest of the family was already there, with multiple suitcases each. "Mom, you hang on to the passports and paperwork," my father said, handing Grandma a folder. "You're the most responsible one." Grandma beamed with pride at being given this important responsibility. We checked our luggage, received our boarding passes, and made our way through security without incident. Throughout this process, no one said anything to indicate Grandma wouldn't be coming. They all maintained the charade, completely discussing which activities they were looking forward to doing with her in Hawaii. As we approached the gate, I noticed my parents exchanging glances. My stomach tightened. We joined the line as boarding was announced, passengers lining up as the gate agent began checking boarding passes. Just as we were approaching the front of the line, my father suddenly turned to Grandma. His expression changed completely, the fake warmth vanishing in an instant. "There's no ticket for you," he said coldly. "I never intended to take you along. You're too old for this trip. You'd just slow us down." Grandma stood frozen, her face a mask of confusion. "What do you mean I paid for everything?" My father snatched the folder with the passports from her hands. That $18,000 is the price you pay for us to have a vacation we deserve. You've had your time. Now it's ours. I watched in horror as the realization dawned on Grandma's face. Her eyes filled with tears, her hands trembling as she tried to process this betrayal. But all my things are checked in, she stammered. My luggage. We'll enjoy your new clothes, my mother said, with a dismissive smirk. You should head home now. The taxi stand is back that way. She pointed vaguely toward the terminal entrance. Brian laughed under his breath while Heather looked uncomfortable, but remained silent, staring at her phone as if it were suddenly the most interesting thing in the world. A few nearby passengers had noticed the scene and were watching with concerned expressions. An elderly couple shook their heads in disgust. I looked at my grandmother, this woman who had loved and supported our family unconditionally for decades, standing there humiliated and heartbroken. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I'm staying with Grandma, I announced, firmly stepping away from the boarding line to stand beside her. My father's face contorted with anger. Don't be ridiculous, Amanda. Get back in line. No, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. What you're doing is cruel and disgusting. I won't be part of it. If you stay, you're cut off, he threatened, his voice low but intense. No more help with your rent, no more family support, nothing. I took a deep breath. I don't need your money anymore, Dad. I need my self-respect. And right now, Grandma needs me. My father's face turned dark red. He stepped toward me and, to my shock, slapped me hard across the face. The sound echoed in the gate area, and several people gasped. My cheeks stung, but I didn't back down. I stood taller, staring him directly in the eyes. An airport security officer approached quickly. Is there a problem here? He asked, looking between us with concern. No problem, my father said, suddenly all smiles again. Just a family disagreement. We're fine. He turned back to me, speaking through clenched teeth. You're making a huge mistake. Don't expect anything from us when you come crawling back. Enjoy your trip, I said quietly. I won't be crawling anywhere. My mother refused to meet my eyes as she hurried through the gate. Brian smirked and followed her. Heather hesitated for a moment, almost looking like she might say something, but then hurried after them without a word. My father gave me one last venomous look before disappearing through the boarding door. And just like that, they were gone, leaving Grandma and me standing alone at the gate. I put my arm around her shoulders as she began to sob quietly. Together we watched through the large windows as the plane eventually pulled away from the gate, carrying my family to their stolen vacation. Let's go home, Grandma, I said gently. We'll figure this out together. The taxi ride back to Grandma's house was painfully quiet. She sat beside me, staring out the window, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I tried a few times to start a conversation, but she responded with only nods or single words. The shock was still too fresh, the wound too raw. When we arrived at her house, it felt eerily empty. The new luggage she hadn't taken was still sitting in the hallway, tags attached, a cruel reminder of the trip she would never take. I carried it upstairs and out of sight while Grandma sank into her favorite armchair in the living room, still wearing her travel outfit. I made us some tea, adding a splash of brandy to hers, hoping it might help calm her nerves. When I returned to the living room, I found her staring blankly at the family photos on the mantelpiece. I was so stupid, she whispered, her voice breaking. So incredibly stupid. You weren't stupid, Grandma, I said, sitting beside her and taking her hand. You were kind and trusting. They're the ones who are wrong, not you. She looked at me then, her eyes red and swollen. $18,000, she said. All that money gone. But it's not even about the money. It's that my own son could do this to me, that he could plan this humiliation, this cruelty. And then the dam broke. She sobbed openly, deep, heaving cries that seemed to come from the very core of her being. I held her as she wept, my own tears falling silently. We stayed that way for what felt like hours, the tea growing cold beside us. The next few days were difficult. Grandma barely ate or slept. She would drift around the house like a ghost, picking up photos of my father as a child, staring at them, as if trying to recognize the boy she raised in the man who had betrayed her. At night, I would hear her pacing in her room, or quietly crying. I called my office and explained that I needed emergency family leave. My boss, understanding the situation, gave me 2 weeks without hesitation. I dedicated myself to taking care of Grandma, cooking her favorite meals, trying to tempt her appetite with small portions of comfort food. I read to her from her favorite mystery novels in the evenings, put on classic movies she loved, anything to distract her from the constant replay of that horrible moment at the airport. Slowly, she began to open up. At first, it was just anger and hurt pouring out in bursts. Memories of other times my father had taken advantage of her, instances I hadn't even known about. But as the days passed, our conversations deepened. One afternoon, about a week after the airport incident, Grandma brought out a dusty photo album I'd never seen before. It contained pictures from before I was born, when Grandma and Grandpa were young entrepreneurs starting their manufacturing business. "Your grandfather and I built everything from nothing," she told me, her finger tracing the outline of his face in a faded photograph. "We worked 18-hour days, took second mortgages on our house, ate ramen noodles for a year straight to keep the business afloat during the recession." She turned the pages, showing me their journey from a tiny workshop to the successful company it eventually became. "We did all this so our children would have opportunities, so they would understand the value of hard work and integrity. Where did we go wrong with your father?" I had no answer for her. Instead, I asked questions about Grandpa, about their early days together, about the challenges they overcame. As she spoke, I saw a spark returning to her eyes, her voice growing stronger as she recounted their victories and adventures. She revealed more about my father's financial exploitation than I had ever known. After Grandpa died, Dad had convinced her to sell her controlling interest in the company, promising to invest the proceeds for better returns. He had tricked her into signing over the deed to a valuable piece of property by burying it in a stack of routine paperwork. There had been numerous emergency loans that were never repaid, each accompanied by elaborate stories of temporary hardship that pulled at her heartstrings. "He used my love against me," she said softly. "Used my desire to help him as a weapon." But as painful as these revelations were, they seemed to be helping her process what had happened. Each day she grew a little stronger, a little more determined not to let this betrayal define her remaining years. By the end of the second week, Grandma was getting up early again, tending to her beloved garden, calling old friends she had neglected, while focusing on my father's family. She even joined me for a walk around the neighborhood, waving to neighbors and stopping to admire their winter decorations. One evening, as we sat by the fireplace drinking hot chocolate, Grandma turned to me with new resolve in her eyes. "I've been thinking," she said. "We shouldn't waste time being sad about a trip that never was. Let's make our own memories instead." Together, we created a list of local activities we could enjoy, visiting the art museum she loved, attending a holiday concert, trying out the new restaurant downtown that had gotten rave reviews. It wasn't Hawaii, but it was real and honest, unlike the false promises my family had made. As we brainstormed, Grandma mentioned something that caught my attention. "I need to look at my financial situation," she said firmly. "I've been too passive, letting your father handle everything. That ends now." "I can help you with that," I offered. It's what I do for a living, after all. She nodded thoughtfully. I'd appreciate that. But I'm also thinking of calling an old friend. Her grandson is a financial attorney. He might be able to give us some professional advice about my options. That sounds like a great idea, I agreed, relieved that she was taking active steps to protect herself. The next morning, Grandma called her friend Margaret, whom she'd known since college. As she explained the situation, I could hear her voice growing stronger, more determined. By the time she hung up, there was a new light in her eyes. James is coming tomorrow, she announced. Margaret's grandson. He's a lawyer who specializes in financial matters and elder law. He said he'd be happy to review my situation. For the first time since the airport, I saw genuine hope on my grandmother's face. Neither of us knew then how significantly this meeting would change both our lives. The doorbell rang promptly at 10 the next morning. Grandma had dressed carefully for this meeting, wearing a smart blue dress and pearl earrings that Grandpa had given her on their 30th anniversary. I opened the door to find a tall man in his early 30s, dressed in a well-tailored gray suit, holding a leather briefcase. "You must be Amanda," he said, with a warm smile extending his hand. "I'm James Williams, Margaret's grandson. Thank you for having me over." There was something immediately likable about James. His handshake was firm but not overpowering. His smile reached his eyes, and he had an air of quiet confidence that put me at ease immediately. I showed him to the living room where Grandma waited. When he saw her, his expression softened. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, using Grandma's last name respectfully. "I'm so sorry about what you've been through. My grandmother thinks the world of you, and I'm here to help in any way I can." Grandma gestured for him to sit down. "Please call me Martha, and I appreciate you coming on such short notice." James set his briefcase on the coffee table and took out a legal pad. "Why don't you start by telling me exactly what happened, and then we can discuss your financial situation and your options." For the next hour, Grandma recounted everything from the Thanksgiving dinner to the airport betrayal. James listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but never interrupting her flow. His expression remained professional, but I could see flashes of genuine anger when she described how my father had humiliated her at the airport. When she finished, James nodded thoughtfully. "What your son did could potentially constitute elder financial abuse, which is both a civil and criminal matter in this state. But before we discuss legal action, I'd like to understand the broader financial picture. What access does your son currently have to your accounts and assets?" Grandma explained how my father had been managing her finances since Grandpa died, including having power of attorney and being a signatory on several of her accounts. "I'd like to see your financial statements and any legal documents you have," James said. "With your permission, of course." Grandma agreed immediately, and I helped her gather the relevant paperwork from her home office. As James reviewed the documents, his frown deepened. "Martha, I'm seeing some concerning transactions here," he said finally. "Large withdrawals and transfers that don't seem to have clear purposes. Do you authorize all of these?" Grandma leaned forward to look at the statements he was pointing to. I don't recognize many of these," she admitted, her voice small. "Jake said he was diversifying my investments." James continued methodically through the paperwork, taking detailed notes. By lunchtime, he had identified numerous problematic transactions and potential abuses of the power of attorney. "Would you mind if I took copies of these?" he asked. "I'd like to review them more thoroughly and potentially consult with a forensic accountant colleague." "Of course," Grandma agreed. "Take whatever you need." I offered to make lunch, and as I prepared sandwiches in the kitchen, I could hear James explaining various legal concepts to Grandma in the dining room. His manner was patient and clear, never condescending, despite the complexity of the information. Over lunch, the conversation shifted to more personal topics. James told us about his grandmother, Margaret, and her friendship with Grandma, dating back to their college days. He shared stories of growing up hearing about Aunt Martha and her amazing pies at joint family gatherings when he was a child. Grandma was heartbroken when you two lost touch after your husband's passing, he told Grandma. She tried calling several times, but your son always said you were too busy to come to the phone. Grandma's eyes widened. I never received any messages from Margaret. I thought she had forgotten about me. James nodded grimly. Unfortunately, isolating elderly individuals from their support network is a common tactic in cases like this. After lunch, James asked if he could see additional financial records stored on Grandma's computer. I helped set him up in the home office, and he worked diligently for several hours while Grandma rested. When he emerged, his expression was serious. Martha, I've found evidence of numerous unauthorized transactions from your retirement accounts. Based on what I'm seeing, your son has withdrawn over $130,000 in the past 3 years without proper documentation or apparent authorization. Grandma gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. That's impossible. He wouldn't. I'm afraid the records are quite clear, James said gently. And this $18,000 vacation is just the latest example. Over the next few days, James became a regular presence at Grandma's house. He brought in a colleague with forensic accounting expertise, and together they pieced together a disturbing picture of my father's financial exploitation. James also helped Grandma begin the process of securing her remaining assets, starting with revoking the power of attorney and changing account access. As we worked together on organizing Grandma's paperwork and creating new financial safeguards, James and I began to develop a connection that went beyond the professional relationship. We would often find ourselves talking late into the evening after Grandma had gone to bed, sharing a bottle of wine and our life stories. I learned that James had chosen elder law after watching his own grandfather fall victim to a scam that depleted his savings. The most devastating part wasn't even the money he told me one night. It was the shame and loss of dignity. No one deserves to feel that way, especially not after a lifetime of hard work and generosity. I found myself increasingly drawn to his compassion, intelligence, and quiet strength. Unlike the men I had dated previously, James listened more than he spoke, and seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and experiences. He never tried to impress me with displays of wealth or status, instead showing his character through his actions and unwavering support for Grandma. One evening, about 2 weeks after we first met, James arrived with dinner from Grandma's favorite Italian restaurant and a legal document. I've prepared a revocable living trust for you, Martha, he explained as we ate. It will protect your assets while still giving you complete control. I'm recommending that Amanda serve as your trustee if she's willing. Grandma looked at me questioningly. Would you do that, dear? Of course, I said without hesitation. I'd be honored. I've also drafted a new will, James continued, and I've prepared the paperwork to formally demand repayment of the $18,000 taken for the vacation, as well as documentation of the other unauthorized loans and withdrawals. As he outlined the legal strategy, I was struck by how effectively he had balanced aggression in protecting Grandma's interests with sensitivity to her emotional state. He never pushed her to take actions she wasn't comfortable with, but he also didn't sugarcoat the seriousness of the situation. After dinner, Grandma excused herself to call Margaret, leaving James and me alone in the living room. Thank you, I said simply, for everything you're doing for her. He smiled, his eyes warm in the soft lamplight. It's my job, but it's also more than that. Your grandmother is an extraordinary woman. Anyone would be lucky to have her in their life. She is, I agreed. I just wish I'd done more to protect her sooner. James reached out and briefly touched my hand. You're here now. That's what matters. You stood up to your entire family for her. That takes real courage. Something shifted between us in that moment, a recognition of feelings that had been building since we met. Neither of us acted on it immediately, both aware of the professional and emotional complexities of the situation. But from that evening on, there was an unspoken understanding that whatever was developing between us was special and worth exploring when the time was right. As the days passed, the transformation in Grandma was remarkable. The broken, humiliated woman from the airport was gone, replaced by someone who reminded me of the strong, confident grandmother of my childhood. She joined a senior center's book club, started attending Tai Chi classes twice a week, and reconnected with old friends, including Margaret, who became a regular visitor. I've spent too many years living for other people, she told me one morning as we worked in her garden. First raising your father, then supporting your grandfather and building the business, then trying to be the perfect grandmother. I forgot who I was outside of those roles. She stood up, brushing dirt from her gardening gloves. I'm 76 years old, Amanda. I don't know how many years I have left, but I'm going to live them for me. Her newfound independence and joy were inspiring, and I found myself reevaluating my own life choices. I had always been the peacekeeper in the family, the one who went along to avoid conflict, even when I knew something was wrong. Standing up to my father at the airport had awakened something in me, a strength I hadn't known I possessed. Meanwhile, my relationship with James continued to evolve. What had begun as a professional connection had blossomed into friendship, and then something deeper. We tried to maintain boundaries while the legal work was ongoing, but our feelings became increasingly difficult to ignore. 2.5 weeks after the airport incident, James asked me to dinner at a small French restaurant downtown, just the two of us. Away from Grandma's house and the legal paperwork, we finally acknowledged what we both had been feeling. I've never met anyone like you, Amanda, he said, as we shared a chocolate soufflé for dessert. You're brilliant, compassionate, and stronger than you give yourself credit for. I could say the same about you, I replied, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the restaurant's candlelight. You've helped Grandma reclaim her life, her dignity. I don't know how to thank you for that. Have dinner with me again tomorrow, he suggested with a smile. And the night after that would be thanks enough. When I told Grandma about our official date, she was delighted. I've seen the way you two look at each other, she said with a knowing smile. He's a good man, Amanda. The kind who stands up for what's right, like you. As our relationship deepened, we received occasional updates about my family's Hawaiian vacation through social media. Heather posted endless photos of beaches, cocktails, and resort amenities, carefully tagged with number blessed and number family time. My mother shared pictures of shopping excursions, showing off expensive purchases. It was as if they were flaunting how they had spent Grandma's money. Once Heather called me late at night, slightly drunk from what sounded like a beach party. I miss you, she slurred. It's weird without you here. Then you shouldn't have gone, I replied simply. What you all did to Grandma was unforgivable. I know, she whispered. I feel terrible, but Dad said. You're an adult, Heather, I interrupted. You could have chosen differently. She was quiet for a moment. Are you really not coming back to the apartment? We had been roommates before all this happened. No, I said firmly. I'm staying with Grandma. I've already given notice on my half of the lease. She hung up soon after, and I didn't hear from her again. My father, however, sent an email that was pure intimidation, promising that I would regret taking sides against the family and that we would settle accounts when they returned. I showed the email to James, who added it to the growing file of evidence against my father. By this point, the legal groundwork was well established. The new will had been signed and notarized with James as the witness. The trust had been created with all major assets transferred into it and me as the trustee. Formal demands for repayment had been sent to my father's email and physical address, though we didn't expect a response until his return. "We're in good shape legally," James assured me and Grandma as we reviewed everything, "but we should be prepared for an emotional confrontation when they return. People like your father don't respond well to having their control challenged." Together, we developed a strategy for the inevitable confrontation. James suggested having witnesses present and possibly recording the interaction for legal protection. We also discussed the emotional aspects, with James sharing techniques for staying calm in the face of manipulation and anger. "The key is to not engage with the emotional bait," he explained. "Your father will try to provoke reactions, shift blame, or make you feel guilty. Remember that those are tactics, not reality." As the date of my family's return approached, I took a significant step in my own life. After consulting with Grandma and much soul-searching, I decided to resign from my financial planning position and accept an offer to join James's law firm as a financial analyst specializing in elder abuse cases. My experience with Grandma had shown me that this was work that truly mattered, where I could make a real difference. I also officially moved in with Grandma taking the guest bedroom as my own. It was a temporary arrangement we both understood, but it gave me peace of mind knowing she wasn't alone and gave her the security of having family nearby who genuinely cared. The night before my family was scheduled to return, James came over with ingredients to cook dinner for us. As he prepared a delicious pasta primavera in Grandma's kitchen, I was struck by how natural it felt, how right to have him there with us. We had created our own little family unit bound not by obligation or DNA, but by choice and genuine love. After dinner, as we sat in the living room with coffee, Grandma brought up the impending confrontation. "I want you both to know," she said firmly, "that I'm ready for tomorrow. I've spent my whole life trying to keep the peace to be the perfect mother and grandmother, but that ends now. I won't be manipulated or taken advantage of anymore." She reached out, taking one of my hands and one of James's. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. That's what real family does." As James and I drove to his apartment later that night, he seemed thoughtful. "What are you thinking about?" I asked. He glanced over at me with a soft smile. "Just that I never expected to find someone like you when I took on your grandmother's case. It feels like the universe put us all together for a reason." I knew exactly what he meant. Despite all the pain and betrayal that had brought us to this point, I couldn't regret any of it. It had led me to where I was supposed to be all along. The morning of my family's return dawned bright and clear. Heather had sent a text the night before, saying they would be stopping by Grandma's house around noon after landing at the airport. I suspected they wanted to check if the dust had settled, and if Grandma was in a forgiving mood, perhaps even willing to provide more financial support. Grandma dressed carefully in a powder blue suit that she often wore to church. She applied makeup, styled her hair, and even put on the diamond earrings Grandpa had given her for their 40th anniversary. She looked elegant, confident, and completely in command. James arrived at 11, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit with a subtle blue tie that complemented Grandma's outfit perfectly. He brought his briefcase containing all the legal documents we might need, and a small bouquet of yellow roses for Grandma, which made her smile. "You look ready for battle," he told her with admiration. "Not battle," she corrected him, "justice." As noon approached, I felt my stomach tightening with anxiety. Despite all our preparation, I wasn't sure how I would react to seeing my family again after what they had done. James seemed to sense my nervousness and gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. "Remember," he said quietly, You've done nothing wrong. Stand your ground." At 12:15, we heard cars pulling into the driveway. Grandma positioned herself in her favorite armchair, looking every bit the family matriarch. James stood slightly behind her right shoulder, the perfect picture of professional support. I took my place on Grandma's left, completing our united front. The doorbell rang, and I went to answer it. My family stood on the porch, tanned from 3 weeks in the Hawaiian sun, loaded down with shopping bags and souvenir items. My father's smile faltered slightly when he saw me, but he quickly recovered. "Amanda, you're still here," he said, as if this were a pleasant surprise rather than a confrontation. "We had such an amazing trip. Wait until Mom hears all about it." They pushed past me into the house, talking loudly about the resort, the beaches, the activities they had enjoyed. My mother was in the middle of describing a luau when they entered the living room and saw Grandma sitting regally in her chair, with James standing beside her. The effect was immediate. My father stopped mid-stride, his expression shifting from false cheer to confusion to wariness in the span of seconds. My mother's mouth snapped shut. Brian took an instinctive step backward. Only Heather continued forward, giving Grandma an awkward hug. "Who's this, my father?" demanded, glaring at James. Grandma smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "This is James Williams, my attorney. He's also the grandson of my dear friend Margaret. You remember her, don't you, Jake? The friend whose calls you never bothered to pass on to me." My father's face paled slightly. "You don't need an attorney, Mom. Whatever Amanda's been telling you, I'm sure we can sort this out as a family." "A family," Grandma repeated, her voice cool. "Is that what you call people who steal $18,000 from their mother and abandon her at an airport?" "That was a misunderstanding," my father protested, forcing a laugh. "We were always planning to reschedule your portion of the trip for a time better suited to your health." "Right, Stephanie." He looked to my mother for backup. My mother nodded quickly. "Of course. We were worried about the long flight for you, Martha. It was for your own good." James stepped forward, opening his briefcase. "That's an interesting reinterpretation of events, Mr. Thompson. However, we have evidence indicating this was a deliberate act of financial exploitation." He removed a folder and handed it to my father. "This is a formal demand for repayment of the $18,000 taken under false pretenses, as well as documentation of $132,000 in unauthorized withdrawals from your mother's accounts over the past 3 years. My father's face turned from pale to red. "What the hell is this? Mom, are you seriously letting some stranger come in and make accusations against your own son?" "He's not making accusations," Jake, Grandma said firmly. "He's stating facts. Facts that I should have faced long ago." James continued professionally. "Mrs. Thompson has revoked your power of attorney, removed you as a signatory on all her accounts, and established a revocable living trust to protect her assets. She is also prepared to pursue legal action, both civil and criminal, if necessary." My father threw the folder onto the coffee table. "This is ridiculous. Amanda has poisoned you against me. After everything I've done for you, Mom, this is how you repay me, by threatening me with lawyers and accusations." "What exactly have you done for her, Dad?" I asked, speaking up for the first time. "Besides taking her money, isolating her from her friends, and humiliating her at an airport." "Stay out of this," he snapped. "This is between me and my mother." "No," I said firmly. "It stopped being just between you two when you took advantage of her love and trust, when you made all of us complicit in your scheme." Grandma raised a hand, silencing everyone. "Jake, I have loved you your entire life. I have supported you, believed in you, and given you every benefit of the doubt. But that ends today. You stole from me. You lied to me. You humiliated me in public. And worst of all, you taught your children that this is how family treats each other. Her voice was steady, her gaze unwavering. I want my money back, all of it. And then I want you out of my life until you can demonstrate true remorse and change. My father's face contorted with rage. You ungrateful old woman, who do you think paid for this house, who managed your investments after Dad died? You'd have nothing without me. Actually, James interjected, according to the financial records, Mrs. Thompson and her late husband paid for this house in full 30 years ago. And her investment portfolio has consistently underperformed the market since you began managing it with numerous unexplained withdrawals. My father turned his fury toward me. And you, dating Mom's lawyer. How convenient. What's your angle here, her will? Planning to cut the rest of us out? Before I could respond, Grandma spoke. Amanda stayed with me when all of you abandoned me. She has shown me what real family loyalty means. And yes, I have changed my will. Not because she asked me to, but because she's the only one who deserves to be in it. My mother, who had been largely silent, finally spoke up. Martha, you're making a terrible mistake. Families should stick together. We can work this out. Where was that family loyalty at the airport? Stephanie Grandma asked quietly. My mother had no answer. Heather stepped forward, tears in her eyes. Grandma, I'm so sorry. I should have said something, done something. I knew it was wrong. Yet you went anyway. Grandma pointed out, though, her tone was gentler than it had been with my parents. Choices have consequences, Heather. Remember that. James brought the conversation back to the practical matters at hand. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, you have two options. You can voluntarily repay the money you've taken, or we can pursue this matter through the courts. Given the evidence we've assembled, including financial records and witness testimonies, I'm confident in our case. My father looked like he might explode, but my mother placed a restraining hand on his arm. She had always been more practical than him, more aware of appearances and consequences. How long do we have to decide? She asked, her voice tight. The demand letter specifies 14 days, James replied. After that, we'll file suit. Brian, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. This is bullshit. You can't prove anything. It's her word against ours. James smiled slightly. Actually, bank records' power of attorney documentation and the testimony of multiple witnesses at the airport provide quite compelling evidence. Financial elder abuse carries both civil and criminal penalties in this state. The word criminal seemed to finally penetrate my father's anger. His face shifted from rage to calculation. Fine, he said abruptly. I'll pay back the vacation money. It was just a misunderstanding anyway. As for these other so-called unauthorized withdrawals, we'll need to review them. I have documentation for everything. I'm sure you do, James said smoothly. We'll expect all relevant documents, along with the initial $18,000 repayment within 14 days. My father turned to Grandma, his expression now a mask of wounded innocence. Mom, I can't believe you'd do this to your own son, after everything we've been through together. But Grandma wasn't falling for it anymore. I'm not doing anything to you, Jake. I'm simply refusing to let you do more damage to me. There's a difference. She stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. I think you should leave now. James has my legal requirements, and Amanda has my full support. I have nothing more to say to any of you until you've made restitution. For a moment I thought my father might refuse to go, might continue arguing, or even become physically aggressive. But James moved slightly forward, his presence, a reminder of the legal consequences that awaited if this escalated further. My family gathered their things, the holiday cheer completely evaporated. As they headed for the door, my father turned back for one parting shot. "You'll regret this, both of you," he said, looking from Grandma to me. "Family is all you have in the end." "No," Grandma replied calmly. "Family is supposed to be people who love and support each other unconditionally. What you're describing is just shared DNA. I've learned there's a world of difference between the two." After they left, the three of us sat in silence for a moment, processing what had just happened. Then Grandma let out a long breath and smiled a genuine smile that lit up her entire face. "Well," she said, "that went better than I expected." 3 months have passed since that confrontation. True to form, my father waited until the last possible day to deliver a check for $18,000, along with a stack of hastily fabricated documentation for the other withdrawals. James's forensic accountant colleague easily disproved most of his claims, and negotiations for the remaining repayments are ongoing. Grandma has flourished in her newfound independence. She volunteers at a senior center, helping other elderly individuals learn about financial safety and avoiding scams. She and Margaret have become inseparable again, taking a small cruise together that Grandma paid for herself, creating the vacation memories she deserved all along. As for me, I've found my calling in the work at James's firm, using my financial background to help protect vulnerable seniors. James and I are officially engaged with plans for a small wedding in Grandma's garden next spring. My former family hasn't contacted me again, though. Heather occasionally likes my social media posts, a small gesture that suggests she might be rethinking her own choices. The most profound change, though, has been in how I understand the concept of family. Blood ties are just one type of connection, and often not the strongest or most meaningful. True family is built on respect, support, and genuine love, not obligation or manipulation. Sometimes you have to lose a toxic family to find the people who truly deserve to be in your life. As Grandma told me recently, getting left at that airport was the best thing that ever happened to me. It opened my eyes to what I had lost and what I could still gain. Sometimes, the most painful betrayals can lead to the most beautiful beginnings. If you've ever had to choose between what's right and what's expected, or if you've found family in unexpected places, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more stories of resilience and healing, and share with someone who might need to be reminded that sometimes standing your ground is the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for others. Thank you for listening, and remember, it's never too late to rewrite your story.